Hi, everyone. I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning into one of our talks today. We are a year-round talk series bringing you the best creative voices across film, television, and theater. And today we are so fortunate to be joined by John Magaro, who is currently starring in Kelly Reichardt's First Cow. And the first thing I wanted to ask you about in terms of working with Kelly on this film is, I know that you had seen her work and been a fan of it, but also in particular with Meek's Cutoff, which, whilst it's a very, very different film, there's a little bit of a similar sensibility in the way that it's filmed and the way that she approaches character with like that beautiful slow burn that she's so good at as a director. And wanted to ask about whether that was a really useful tool for you and if that informed part of the way that you sat and developed this character and thought about how you were going to bring him to life at the very beginning when it was just you sitting at home with the script.
Yeah, I certainly watched Meek's Cutoff and thought that this, was going to actually be more similar to Meek's Cutoff in my approach to it. Not long after we began filming, did I start to realize that this was its own thing. I think First Cow is a accumulation of a lot of her work. I think you find similarities in Old Joy, Certain Women, Meek's definitely, and even Wendy and Lucy. I think all those experiences of Kelly's helped inform the way she was going to tell this story. Meek's, has there's a common bond with Jonathan Raymond, who also wrote that with Kelly, and a Western feel to it, an old Western feel. But fortunately, we sort of told our own story. Meek's has this beautiful wide landscape because you're out you're out on the trail, so it feels more vast almost. You have these really long, beautiful shots that are from a distance where you watch these scenes play out almost in echoes. I think Kelly chose, even with the aspect ratio and other choices, to come more intimately into Cookie and King Lou's world, which lends itself very well to this story.
Mm-hmm. And I know that you spent some time kind of out in the wilderness with Orion Lee, who plays King Lou in the film. And, that was in some part to kind of like teach you some of the things about what it would look like day to day living off the land. But wanted to ask you about the character development side that came out of it. And if it was something where when you were in that space that you were having discussions about character as well as you were learning these things and how that would fold into their relationship, or if it was more that it just built this amazing rapport between the two of you and was just a time to build that chemistry that would naturally feed into the scenes that you then filmed together.
Yeah, anytime you start a film, or especially a film, but any new project, whether it's theater or television, it's such an artificial experience because you're being put into a situation. Oftentimes you're supposed to have a very strong, deep relationship with your scene partner. That's tough to find, especially when you only have a week before you start rolling camera. So when we went on that wilderness retreat or wilderness boot camp, however you want to call it, it was an opportunity for Orion and I to form a language, a shorthand, understand each other's rhythms, understand just sort of how we worked, which was nice because showing up in the camera when the camera started rolling, it just opened up more opportunities. I think we had a chance to know each other, and that shorthand helps you move along and form maybe more genuine moments on screen. But it was also valuable because we had a chance to learn these skills and find our roles within the household we were building. The hunting and the nesting that each of our characters exhibit throughout the story.
Mm-hmm. It's so beautiful watching their friendship and that relationship dynamic develop on screen, but also in particular with Cookie as well, because he's someone who comes across as kind of like very gentle and very introverted, and finally he gets the opportunity to kind of like lean into these quiet passions that he's had, and he becomes a little bit more open and a little bit less risk averse. And so was really curious about the way that you kind of like just so gently and gradually thought about the way that you were mapping out that ascension in his personality and the different traits that you gradually start to pull out in him.
Yeah, well, I think we were very fortunate to have a script that laid it out for us very clearly. Not much changed from the script to what the audience gets to see on the screen. Um, that development of Cookie was very, very, very clear. So as an actor, you could trust the language, you could trust where you were going, and it was able to come out more naturally. Uh, you're always tapping into your own personality in these things, and I don't feel like I'm nearly as introverted as Cookie. um, but I do remember when I was young and starting this in the city, and I was doing a play. uh, my first like really big experience doing a play at a really nice theater in New York, and I felt like such an outsider that I hardly spoke besides when I was doing the scenes where I felt like comfortable, much like Cookie when he's cooking. And one of the, I overheard, I was outside and I overheard one of the other actors talking. He said, John is one of the shyest people I've ever met. And I never felt like I was that way. And I think people who know me wouldn't say that about me. But, when we're thrown into alien situations, oftentimes we don't want to overstep our bounds. We aren't sure which way to go. And Cookie is thrown totally into an alien world, and it's very much an outsider. So it takes him time to start to open up. And luckily, King Lou gives him that opportunity to come into his own.
Mm-hmm. And because you're mentioning that shyness, that's one of the really interesting aspects to watch in those very first scenes where we see him before he's even had the chance to meet King Lou. And, did that kind of really heavily inform the way that you kind of just, it almost feels like you're a little bit further towards the edge of the scene and you're really just kind of holding back and quietly watching everything rather than being a participant with your scene partners?
Yeah, I mean that is Cookie's nature. Cookie, he's a watcher. He's an observer. I mean, there's these beautiful moments that Kelly and John wrote where Cookie is out on the trail, or even in the cabin where he looks out and sees the owl, or it takes in the salamander. Um, but unlike our present era, I think there's a much greater patience in that world. There's not a need to say something right away. There's not a need to do something right away because you have kind of all the time in the world. Um, and Cookie really is able to lean into that.
Mm-hmm. And, I know in terms of preparing and kind of understanding that huge passion and skill that he has in terms of baking, which is, even more remarkable when you think about the time that he was doing it, that one of your things that you did was to actually get some cookbooks from around like the Lewis and Clark expedition time and to make some of those recipes. And just wanted to ask you a little bit about the way in that that really helped you to understand like that passion, that patience that he would have had, and the difference between baking now and like creating these very kind of like rustic of the pieces that he does.
Yeah, I found those cookbooks which Kelly sent me really helpful. Other jobs I've done, there's different ways to approach the character and kind of find your way in. Something like The Big Short, it's very technical, and the language and the pace of those people is much more fast. So reading and watching modern things and having a quickness was called for. Whereas this, like you've said, there was a quietness, a slowness, him being sort of back and watching a bit. And the cooking of that arrow that I learned takes patience. It takes time. So much of what they were doing on the Lewis and Clark expedition was stewing things, which takes hours to tenderize meat because you're using a lot of meat that these weren't filet mignon. This wasn't things that were tender. It was kind of the cuts that no one wanted because you had to eat everything. So you had to really break it down, and to do that, it takes time. And even if you're just roasting something over a fire, building the fire takes time. Cooking an entire animal takes time over low heat because you're not, you can't just throw it into the fire. So having those moments to meditate while you're prepping, chopping the vegetables, and letting the things marinate and take time to cook, um, leaves you alone with your thoughts a lot, and it gives you a sense of focus, which helped me, understand Cookie a bit more.
Yeah, and within the script, we get a couple of details about the genesis of his interest and the passion, and the
Yeah.
fact that he had the opportunity to study under a baker who taught him kind of everything he knows. But kind of beyond those kind of tidbits of information that you had, how much further did you want to go, and is it useful for you in terms of your process of thinking about, okay, what was the space that he grew up in? What was the genesis of this? Kind of how did he end up even at that point where he was in kind of an apprenticeship trainee position? And like, how much backstory did you want to craft around that one specific element of him?
I mean, I'm gonna leave a lot of that to me, but to a secret. But yeah, I always sometimes you're especially if you're playing someone who actually existed, you have an entire backstory that you can call upon. With a character like Cookie, yes, I definitely think about that. You're given some tidbits. He came from Maryland. He went to Boston, and then he went out west. And he lost his parents at a young age. For me personally, I did fill in the blanks just so I had a sense of history. I'm a big history nerd myself, so having the opportunity to step back into history, I'd for me, just maybe it doesn't even matter. Maybe it doesn't necessarily translate on screen, but for me personally, I like to build that sort of history.
Mm-hmm. There's also something interesting that you've mentioned previously about, part of your role as an actor is obviously finding the way that you need to show up to be present for your director and for the rest of your cast, and that can look very different on each project. And so I just wanted to ask you a little bit about, what the differences were and what that looks like specifically for a project like this with Kelly and with the rest of the cast on the film.
Well, what a great thing Kelly has is there's a family element there. She works with a lot of people over and over again. She pretty much works out of the Northwest, and so much of the crew lives in the Portland area, and the ones who don't come back, the repeat customers with her over and over and over again. So you feel this embrace immediately when you come onto set, and it allows you to have this freedom. It was just a really great set. I never felt the need to step away and not interact with them because of Cookie's shyness. I felt like we could collaborate and we could come back and forth between us working as filmmakers and also the Cookie character, and I was capable of doing that because it was such a lovely atmosphere on set. Also, we were out in these beautiful woods, which have since, a lot of them have been destroyed by these terrible fires, which is just devastating. But that setting, that natural setting where you didn't have to add much to it, and just being out there in the dirt and among these ferns and these trees, it really transports you into the world and makes your job a lot easier.
Did you find that once you showed up on location, and even just like the details of the costume and the types of material and fabric that you're wearing, that once you were in that physical setting, that there were further elements that you understood about your character and his life and how he lived day to day, just from those physical aspects?
Yeah, definitely. The first gift you're always given when you're ready to start rolling the cameras is the costume, and the costume, if it's good, and this was amazing, it changes the way you walk. It changes, especially this. He has these boots which are falling apart in the beginning, and even the boots he gets later are no prize. So, but that really helps you feel the character, the weight of the character. Then the next thing is the props, and then I think the next thing is the setting. And we had a great production design team that, besides the just natural setting, which they didn't have to do anything with, they were able to create these cabins and this town and this fort that just transported you to 1820. It was really, really remarkable when you have such talented people around you. Again, it makes your job so much easier.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of the scenes themselves, it sounds like the discovery and exploration of individual scenes was less of a rehearsal process, but was interested in kind of like what that looked like right as you were going into filming a scene, or if, because of the way that Kelly tends to film and allow that so much on camera within the way that she captures her characters anyway, if it was more of an on-camera discovery moment that you would have with each other.
I think Kelly really wants to find it on camera. We did read through a couple scenes one afternoon before we started shooting, but again, I think that was more so we could just get to know each other, and it was over lunch. It was very casual, but she wanted to find it on the day the cameras were rolling, and I think that's wise. That's one of the good things about film as opposed to theater. Theater, you're rehearsing, you're coming in, and you're kind of you know attempting to be as fresh and present as you can be, but you're repeating a cycle over and over again. uh it's been said before, and I'll say it again, but film is a rehearsal, the entire thing, which is fun because each take you get to find something new. uh and Kelly really encourages that. She just encourages you to be there and say the words and listen and react and take your time, and oftentimes a director says just say the words and speed it up, go quick, and that sometimes takes the discovery out of it. So it was really fun to be able to throw those conventions away and just be in the moment.
Mm-hmm. With the fact that she does kind of want you to take that time, and she does also within scenes allow for the stillness and the quietness to be a big part of it as well. Did that kind of change the way in which you lived in this character in those moments when you were filming?
Oh, very much so. I mean, again, this is all cumulative. It all informed the next thing. Um, her allowing us to do that, that played into how Cookie was. So taking your time and not and thinking and letting the words come to you and letting what you would say next, into your mind, and then saying it. Um, I think it just helped develop Cookie more three-dimensionally.
Mm-hmm. I know that you've talked a little bit in the past about how you as an actor prefer not to think too much about the framing and the camera work. And so this particular project and the way that it's filmed, and it really just kind of, the camera kind of sits back and captures the whole moment as one, rather than it being about specific types of coverage, really kind of lend itself to the style that you naturally prefer.
Well, it's funny because I don't like to necessarily, like, I don't look at the monitors often. I don't watch playback. I don't do that. So oftentimes I don't know exactly what the shot is. Usually I have an idea. I mean, you just sort of, once you get to know what you're like, oh, it's probably this. But I like I said, I thought it would be, because it was Chris Blauvelt, who's a brilliant cinematographer. And like you said, Meek's Cutoff was probably, most people would think, is the closest reference point for First Cow. I thought it was going to be more of those shots from a distance. I thought it was going to be much more like that. I had no idea that they were doing that academic aspect ratio. I had no clue that was happening. And I'm glad I didn't know. I'm glad that they were able to shoot it and I was able to focus on what I was doing. Yeah, and again, having someone like Chris Blauvelt shoot it, it's going to look beautiful, and that they're gonna do a tremendous job, and he did. So yeah, I just prefer to focus on what I'm doing and trust. That's they're experts at what they're doing, so I'm happy to stay out of their way. No problem.
Yeah. I also feel like it would be remiss not to talk about Eve in the film, who is the, of course, infamous first cow.
Yeah.
But I love the fact that, like, when Kelly talks about casting the cow, that like the level of specificity in it, that she was like, she wanted the smallest cow with the biggest eyes, even the color of the cow with like that beautiful tan, like matches the color of the film. And it just, like, every single detail fits into the specificity. And how did even like her thought process and the detailing of that just really help to make those scenes kind of like so natural as they are?
Well, I think there's something about having any animal next to you, whether it's that salamander, the owl, or Evie, the cow. But a cow, which is such an kind of massive, there's obviously much more massive animals, but relatively it's massive. And for a city boy, it's, intimidating. But there's having something that large and such a gentle soul in a way, that's just really beautiful. And she, you know, I mean, she says, she talks about the casting process and she got headshots. I'm very curious, were they actually headshots or were they, you know, like cell phone pictures or what they really were? But yeah, she went through a whole casting process and she found this beautiful cow who was so lovely and you know, stole the show. And I was really lucky that I got to, you know, be there and milk her and really you know, build a bond with her. And there's a great moment that we didn't plan for when we're out there with Toby Jones, who plays the chief actor, and we walk up to the cow, and you know, she's telling the captain, or Toby's telling the captain about this great cow he has, and Evie just naturally, by that point, we had built sort of a little relationship, started nuzzling against me, and that's something, you know, you can't plan for. It's just a happy accident. And it was really, I think, really lovely. And she has since gone on to have a calf named Cookie. And I think she's living a great life in retirement. I think she's also on Cameo. You know that thing Cameo? I think you can have her give you a birthday wish on Cameo or something for like $25.
That's amazing. And you know, what did that rapport with the animal trainers who were working with her look like when you first arrived on set, with them kind of like introducing you to her and making sure that kind of you knew her personality and her dynamic as you approached her to build that rapport, so that when you did get onto theme, that to set together, that like you had those beautiful moments where she developed such a rapport with you that she saw you and would want to come up to you immediately?
Well, you know, they're very protective of her, as they should be. It's, you know, it's an unnatural thing for a cow to be performing. So they're very protective of her. And I think I was the only one besides them who was allowed to feed Evie or approach Evie. So maybe it was just because I was the only other person giving her treats that she just naturally built a bond with me over a week or so. So maybe it was just her greed and her hunger that made her feel that way. But that's really all it took, is being the guy who fed her. And then she was like, oh, okay, this guy's all right.
He's giving away all the actors' secrets now.
Yeah. That's it. All you got to do is feed an actor and they'll be happy.
It also sounds like, in terms of when you were auditioning for the film, that actually you got the call to audition very close to when you did that. And so I wanted to ask you a little bit about that process for yourself, in terms of just how you approach auditions to begin with, but particularly when something comes in very last minute and you don't necessarily have as much time to do a deep dive into the process, like how you set up and prepare yourself for it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I actually, you know, Kelly, I don't think she's too keen on the traditional audition. She watched some of my previous work, and she watched this film that I did, a short film I did called The One-Armed Man, which is directed by an actor-director, Tim Guinea, and based on a Horton Foote short play. And through that, she decided to cast me. But it was, you know, with, I think, a month or less than a month before we were going to roll. So yeah, there wasn't a lot of time. Immediately, I asked her to send me a bunch of stuff. She did. And that's, you know, it was overwhelming, the amount of information she sent me. And that's, I think, why I was able to kind of look through most of it, and I really focused on those cookbooks. That's where it took me. But yeah, she put a great amount of trust in me. It's very different than other things I've done. But I'm thankful that she did that.
Yeah. You know, and even just thinking to what you're saying about how there was a short film that you've seen, you know, it wouldn't necessarily be the project that you would immediately think that she had seen first that made her choose you and pick you for this. And
well, I think that, you know, she has such an appreciation for cinema and such a well of knowledge. You know, she teaches cinema at Bard, and she's done that for a long time, and she's seen almost everything, you know, all the great things worth seeing. And I think she's confident in what she sees, and it doesn't take much for her to be certain about it. She's able to trust her gut, which is refreshing in a way.
That's amazing. Yeah, well, I wanted to ask you about, like, you know, in terms of things like her watching one of your shorts, you know, I heard that she called Todd Haynes at one point. They had a conversation because he'd worked with you before. And there's so many moments as an actor where, you know, work that you've done in the past or people that you've worked with suddenly lead to a path you wouldn't have expected. And and wanted to kind of see if that's something that you found has happened very continuously in several moments in your career, and how you think about that for yourself.
You know, I hardly ever ask those questions, but like any job or career, relationships oftentimes inform your next step. Um, people like to people like to work with people that they have someone vouches for. They have a confidence that they're not going to be a lunatic. Um, so it's I think it's happened a few times in my career, and I'm happy and grateful for that. Uh, you know, I feel like I have a kind of a craftsman workmanly attitude about this. It's been a slow and steady climb over the 15 years or so that I've been doing this. And I think it's, and I encourage other young actors to do it as well. I think it's a wonderful thing to seek a way to build relationships and put your best foot forward. Uh, it disturbs me, and I find it very odd when people are fortunate enough to be in this business and do everything to spite themselves. I just don't understand that.
Mm-hmm. I also wanted to ask you a little bit about when you wrap up a project and when you finish a role, because I've heard you mention that before you were married, that one of the things that you would do was you would go take a trip somewhere and just really kind of like close off and separate from a role. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to ask kind of like what that looks like now that you can't necessarily jump on a plane and go somewhere for 2 or 3 weeks. And,
you know, I've still been fortunate enough until COVID hit to be able to do a version of that. The thing that's changed now is my wife comes along. Usually, there was actually one time where she didn't come along, and I was able to go out on my own. Yeah, in this new world where there's no traveling, really, I'm not sure what that's going to look like. I find it really helpful to put to close that chapter, you know, and go somewhere and remove yourself totally from what you've just experienced and just, you know, wipe the slate clean. Yeah, I don't know. Hopefully we are able to get back to normal a bit, and I can still do that. But now we have a baby, so I think it's going to be even harder.
Yeah. And in terms of the studying that you did, you were studying kind of very specifically theater acting, and you know, talked a little bit about how whenever you're studying anything, it's like you have to learn the rules in order to break them, and there's certain things that you hold on to and certain things that you throw away. And wanted to ask you kind of like, what are the things that stick with you, but also what are the things that you very quickly went, that was very specific to school, it's good to have as a base toolkit, but doesn't necessarily come into play when I'm doing a character on a project?
Yeah, well, you know, I went to theater school. I went to a conservatory program and got a BFA and all that stuff. It's a strange thing, and it's a very hard thing to teach, because most of those programs, they can't focus on film. They are rooted in theater, and most times in Stanislavski theater. And times have changed and things are different now, because when those theories were written, that was before television or film even really existed. So the style of acting has since changed. But at the heart, so they're teaching that, but at the heart of it, you know, there's a pursuit of truth. There's a need to listen, a hope that you're present. And that's the kernel of it, and that's what you do throughout this thing, whether it's theater, television, or film. So that's the most valuable thing. I always found, you know, like a scene study class is very helpful. Learning like the IPA, not so helpful. You know, the phonetic language did not really translate into my practical experience of working. Now that's me. Every actor is going to be different. Certain things are going to work for you that won't work for other people. What I found most helpful about that experience was, you know, I grew up in a place where there wasn't much theater, there wasn't any film being made. So it gave me 4 years to immerse myself in reading and watching those iconic plays and films that I missed out on. It really gave me that, base of knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for talking to us in depth about all of this and with First Cow. And I hope that you have a lovely rest of your evening with your family today.
Thank you so much. It was great.